Okay, this is A.REI.4.b, Algebra, Reasoning with Equations and Inequalities, Standard 4, Subpart B, Video 1, Solving Polynomial Equations in Factored Form. Here are a few terms I'd like you to know. Write these down in your journals, please, and define them. All right, we're going to begin with the zero product property. And it says let A and B be real numbers, and if A, B equals 0, then A is equal to 0 or B is equal to 0. Here we're going to use the zero product property to solve this given equation. And what we're doing here is we're taking these two binomials, the binomial product, and we're looking for the roots of this particular equation. And this is going to come in handy later on down the road when we start graphing quadratic equations. So before we start the graphing portion of this, I think we need to find out where the roots are. And by doing so, we need to consider what y value could be replaced here so that we get a product that will equal 0. So if you're thinking about the property AB equals 0, we have A right here multiplied by B. So A times B equaling 0, one of them, either A has to be 0 or B has to be 0, or maybe both of them. We're going to find out what their zeros are. All right, a couple ways you could do this using mental math. A pretty simple problem like this. If I have a value of y and I add 9 to it, what can I get as a sum to equal 0? How do I get A here, this first binomial, to be a 0? Well, what added to 9? Negative 9 plus 9 would equal to 0 when I multiply it by B. So let's just solve using basic equations. I think the simplest way would be to take each of these and set them equal to 0 and then solve. So as we said in the first one, we have the y value plus 9. Well, what would you do to solve for y? We would do the inverse operation and we subtract 9 from both sides. So y is going to be equal to 0 minus 9. And we already knew that one of our roots, one of our values, is going to be at negative 9. Solving the second one, we would add 1 to both sides. So y is equal to 0 added to 1. So y is equal to 1. Well, let's check that. If I were to substitute it into this b portion, 1 minus 1 is equal to 0. 0 multiplied by anything, it doesn't matter what happens over here in A. Well, what would that have been if I put a 1 here? 1 plus 9 is 10, so 0 multiplied by 10 is still equal to 0. So your roots end up being, we have negative 9 and positive 1. All right, same idea. It says solve the equation. We're going to find our roots. And you could do it mentally. What number multiplied by 8 subtracted by 6 would get you 0? Or let's get the second possible root and solve. All right, so add 6 to both sides. Divide both sides by your coefficient. So y is equal to reduced form of 3/4, or subtract 14 from both sides. Divide both sides by your coefficient. And y is equal to the reduced fraction of, what do we have? 7/6, which is improper, and that's okay. So final answer would be y can be equal to -7/6 or 3/4 final. All right, now it says find the greatest common monomial factor. So what we're going to be doing is factoring. We've worked a little bit with factoring, and it's basically the distributive property in reverse. And if I'm looking at my first binomial here, and I'm looking to take out the largest monomial factor, what number, let's look at the coefficients first. What coefficient number goes into both of them? What's the highest or greatest common factor of 4 and 4? That would be 4. X and Y are not the same, so we're going to go back into the product, and what are we going to end up with? A X plus a Y. And checking that, let's distribute here. 4 multiplied by X is 4X, plus 4 multiplied by Y is 4Y. So what we did here was we took out the greatest common monomial factor. Okay, next one. Looking at the coefficient first, we have a 7 and a 35. Greatest common factor of 7 and 35 would be 7. So let's take that out. And now we have a situation where we have a variable that is shared. They both have a certain amount of W's. So we want to take out the most amount of W's that they both have in common, and that would be 2. There's 2 within the W to the 5th, and the maximum amount, there's 2 within the W squared, so we take out what they both have in common. Let's go back in. 7W squared multiplied by what gets you 7W to the 5th? Well, that would be W cubed. Minus 7 times 5 is 35. W squared times what gets you W squared? Well, we would have to leave that alone, and that would get us our 35W squared. And our greatest common monomial factor that was taken out is 7W squared. All right, so let's put it all together. Now that we know how to factor out, and we know how to solve for the roots or solve for the zeros, let's do all that at one time. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we want to make sure all of our terms are on one side of the equal sign, and we have our 0 on the other side. And I also like to make sure that the variables have the exponents in descending order. So let's put those in order from what greatest to least, so descending going downward, and we have that. So to the second power, to the first power, and then our 0 is on the right. All right, taking out the greatest common monomial factor of 18c squared and 6c would be 6. And, 6, and we need a variable. They both share at least one c. So there's 1 here and 2 there. So one of them is the most they both have in common. And let's go back in. So 3c, because 6 times 3 is 18, and c times c is c squared, plus, well, what times 6c is going to get me 6c? Well, that would be a 1, and that is equal to 0. Now I have a monomial multiplied by a binomial, so I'm going to solve for my zeros by setting each of those equal to 0. So we have 6c equaling 0, or 3c plus 1 equaling 0. Divide both sides by 6. So c is equal to 0, or let's see, 3c Subtract 1 from both sides is equal to what? -1. Divide both sides by 3. And C could also be equal to -1/3. And again, that's going to come in handy when we start graphing those quadratic equations. Those are the roots. All right, now the second problem on the right here, a little additional work. If I'm solving for my zeros, I need to make sure that I have all of my terms on one side. And to do that, I would have to take this -8m and bring it over to the left. So that would change its sign. How's this going to look? 28m squared. Now it became a +8m. And what happened when I did that? Well, I left the right side blank, which means there are 0 items over there. All right, factoring out the greatest common monomial between those two, it looks like I'm going to have, what, a 4? And how many m's do they? Okay, so maximum amount is 1m. And let's go back in. 7m. 4 times 7 is 28. M times m is m squared. So I got my first term. And then plus, what, 2. 4m times 2 is 8m. And I'm finding my zeros. All right, set each one equal to 0 and solve. So 4m equal to 0, or 7m plus 2 is equal to 0. Subtract 2 from both sides. So 7m is equal to -2. Divide both sides by 7. M is equal to -2/7. Okay, in your journal, please define the given terms on page 2 of the flip chart. If you have any questions, please make sure you let me know what those questions are in class. We can answer them together, and write a few sentences on what you think you learned from this video that might be new, and we can discuss all that in class.